Quiet quitting is usually described as laziness, doing the bare minimum and not being willing to contribute much at work. If you have ever had a co-worker who appeared to be a quiet quitter, you probably felt the frustration. But what if that so-called quiet quitter is actually walking a path you wish you could take? The term became popular after COVID. At that time, many people experienced very different work routines, working from home, remote work, or even unemployment. For the first time, people started asking uncomfortable questions. Hey, why am I working like this? Is this really what I want? Are there any other possibilities? And while quiet quitting sounds negative, lazy, disengaged, unmotivated, it may be misunderstood. Recently, you may not have heard this term as often. Things are going back to normal, or at least a new normal. People have become more conditioned and better adjusted again. On the other hand, another term that is largely positive, contrary to quiet quitting, started to gain popularity. FIRE, financial independence, retire early. Is this just a coincidence? Maybe not. Quiet quitting, in many cases, is the first step that prompts people to think about FIRE. I made this connection after reading the book Early Retirement Extreme and reflecting on some of the author's key ideas. Let me explain why. The core meaning of FIRE is very simple. You spend less than you earn, you build multiple income streams, and over time, the income, ideally passive income, becomes enough to cover your living expenses. At that point, work becomes optional. I want to repeat this clearly. When you reach FIRE, work becomes optional, not redundant. Recently, I've seen quite a number of videos where creators say they have reached financial independence or retired at a certain age, and almost without exception, the comment sections are filled with challenges. Like, with this net worth, do you really think it's enough? If you don't need the money, why are you still trying to earn from YouTube? FIRE can mean very different things to different people. It depends largely on your relationship with money, work, time, and freedom. The way I interpret FIRE is this. The point is not retiring early. It's having the ability to decide whether you want to follow the default script society hands to you. Work for 40 years and retire at 65. That's the default setting. FIRE gives you the option to step outside that script, and for many people, that choice alone is the real goal. Have you ever wondered about this? Over the past few decades, technology, productivity, and total wealth have increased dramatically. So why are people working longer hours, retiring later, and feeling more stressed than previous generations? Shouldn't progress mean less work, more time, more freedom? Instead, many people today spend most of their waking hours working, most of their income servicing debt, mortgages, car loans, and their entire lives preparing for a retirement they may never fully enjoy or that may come too late. This happens because many of us are moving through a system that quietly shapes how we think, work, spend, and plan for the future. After progressing steadily in my organization for many years, I became what some people might call a quiet quitter as well. To the surprise of many of my colleagues, I stepped down from a managerial position, a role that would normally lead to a more senior position over time. I told my director upfront that I no longer wanted to climb that corporate ladder. Instead, I chose to return to being an individual contributor, and that was when I started planning my exit. That process took a few years. Looking back, I was trying to reclaim a choice from a system I had slowly become locked into. Let me explain what I mean by this lock-in system. A life lock-in system is one where your education, your job, your spending habits, your debt, and retirement are tightly connected, making it very hard to step away from the default path. The scary thing is that most people don't feel trapped. They don't feel locked in because they have never experienced anything outside the system. Without comparison, when everyone around them is going through the same thing, everything feels normal. So how does this lock-in happen? It happens through several systems working together. Let's start with education. If you look closely at the modern education system, its primary function is not really about education. It's competition. It ranks, filters, and sorts people. The top performers are rewarded with more options and more choices. They get to choose their next path, the degree they want to pursue, the college they want to enter. Everyone else takes what's left. And if you think about it, this looks very similar to the working world. That's because education is preparation for the workplace, not so much in terms of skill sets, but mentally. It trains us to accept rankings, evaluations, deadlines, and competition as normal. That's why you often hear people say that what they have learned in school has little direct use at work. In reality, the content matters less than the conditioning. Most people still have to relearn the actual skills on the job. Education teaches us how to compete inside the systems and not how to step outside them. And that's the first step of lock-in. If education trains us to compete and accept ranking, then employment is simply the next stage of the same system. The classroom turns into the office, grades turn into performance reviews, ranking turns into job titles and pay scale. Even if you meet all the requirements of a role, you gradually accept that as long as someone else performs better, they get the reward. Many organizations use bell curve appraisal systems, which are not that different from how schools rank students. By the time we enter the workforce, we are already conditioned to operate this way. This is how competition becomes normal and how the lock-in system continues from school into work. Education shapes how we think. Employment then reinforces that mindset, not just through work itself, but through identity and social position. In the beginning, we work mainly for income, but as careers progress, work becomes more than that. It becomes structure, validation, and a key part of how we define ourselves. Job titles slowly turn into who we are. And once identity shifts, consumption follows. Our lifestyle adjusts to match that identity, often without us conscientiously deciding to spend more. That is how higher income quietly turns into higher spending. This is what people often call the lifestyle creep. I remember that in the past, during Christmas gatherings with friends, we would happily just order pizza or fast food and meet at someone's home. It was simple, casual, and everyone will be having a great time. But sometime in our early 30s, those gatherings slowly shifted from homes to restaurants and then to higher end ones. This year, someone even suggested an omakase restaurant in town. These gatherings are rare, and it's great that friends still make the effort to meet. But the fact that the cost of these meetups increased year after year simply because we could afford it made me realize how common and powerful lifestyle creep really is. If you think about everything we talked about so far, education, employment, identity, and consumption, they work like combination locks. They condition how you think, shape how you see yourself, and guide how you live. But you can still move within this system if you know the passcode, or if you try hard enough, you can unlock certain doors. But that is a different kind of lock. It is a padlock. Once it's on, you can't open it through effort alone. You need time and consistent repayment to remove it. That doesn't just lock in your present, it locks in your future. When you take on debt, you are spending money you haven't earned yet. And to have that money in the future, you have to keep working. As a result, your working years begin to stretch forward. After a decade or so of work, you have saved enough for the upfront cost of a home, and the rest is covered by a 25 or 30-year mortgage. That timeline fits perfectly into a typical 40-year career, allowing the debt to be cleared just as you reach retirement. And now the retirement systems enter the picture. As work becomes long-term and predictable, retirement planning is introduced as the solution. Contributions are deducted automatically, rules are set far in advance, and access is restricted until a certain age. Retirement systems are not inherently bad. In fact, they are necessary at a societal level. Pension systems like CPF in Singapore or 401k in the US are designed for the greater good. But when your entire future depends on a single system you don't control, you end up in a very passive position. This becomes the final layer of lock-in, like a bank vault with a delayed opening mechanism. At that point, the question is no longer whether you will work, but for how long and under whose terms. And once everything is in place, retiring at 65 feels like the natural outcome. I remember a few months ago when I submitted my resignation, there was a huge sense of relief. I was still going to the office as usual, but I knew that many of the responsibilities I had been carrying were no longer mine, and that mental offloading felt very good. But after I served my notice period and walked out of the office for the very last time, there was a strange sense of guilt. It felt a bit like skipping school when I was not working. That feeling didn't last long, maybe a week, and then I moved on to the next phase of my life and set up a new routine. But that brief moment was enough to make something clear. When nothing feels urgent anymore and everything becomes optional, meaning doesn't automatically appear. Without structure, some people begin to feel lost. Over time, that lack of direction can turn into anxiety or even depression. That's why freedom is not just precious, it's also expensive. It can cost you a lot financially and also expensive mentally and emotionally. To carry freedom well, you will need capacity. You need structure, self-discipline, and a clear sense of what matters to you. That capacity is built through repeated cycles of reflection and exploration. And the best time to start building it is before you fully exit work. When you still have some structure, some income, and some constraints, you are in the best position to ask deeper questions. Questions like, hey, what kind of life do I actually want now or in the near future? And I deliberately talking about now and the near future, not some distant point when you are 70 years old. When the time horizon is too far away, there's no urgency to act. You let the system take its course and you slowly become passive. The most common advice is to save for retirement and you will have enough when you stop working. But if you think about it mathematically, life is not a single formula with a result 40 years later. It's a function of many smaller decisions that compound over time. If you are a responsible adult who plans well for the next 5 years, then recalculates and adjusts for unexpected events and repeats that process, you are very likely to be fine in your 70s. This difference in time horizon shows up very clearly when we talk about housing debt. One of the most common justifications I hear is that property will appreciate over the next 30 years. The idea is that by the time you retire, the house will be worth millions, you can sell it, unlock a pot of gold, or pass on a valuable legacy to your children. And on paper, that logic is not wrong, but it treats life like a single long equation with a payoff at the end, assuming that everything in between unfolds exactly as planned. And what often gets overlooked is the cost of committing yourself to that plan for decades and how much flexibility and freedom you give up along the way. The longer everything is optimized for a distant outcome, the less room you have to prepare for anything else. That's why freedom is not something that automatically appears just because you reach a certain age or number. Freedom is something you prepare yourself for gradually, intentionally, while you are still inside the system. And this is where quiet quitting plays a part. Once you see quiet quitting this way, not as disengagement, but as preparation, the next question becomes practical. How do you actually loosen the lock-in strategically? There's a natural order to do this because not all parts of the system are equally easy to change. The easiest place to start is consumption. You may not have immediate control over your income, but you almost always have control over your spending. When others upgrade their homes, you pause and think. When others buy cars, you question it. Remember, you're not just paying with money, you're also paying with time and freedom. When you account for that full cost, spending less creates margin. And that margin is where flexibility begins. Once margin exists, the next step is investment. That can mean investing for financial returns or investing in yourself by learning new skills. In both cases, the goal is the same: to reduce your dependence on a single paycheck. Even small amounts matter. The returns may seem insignificant at first, but the goal is not to quit work immediately. It is to make work less compulsory and to build the habits and mindset that support that shift. As financial pressure eases, you can begin to loosen your career lock-in. This is often the hardest step because it's tied to identity, and after years in a row, work becomes who you are. Loosening career lock-in doesn't mean quitting immediately. It can start with using the skills you have developed outside your main job, building optional income streams, and slowly proving to yourself that your value is not confined to a single role, especially one that is defined by others. Over time, this creates flexibility around retirement. Instead of relying entirely on a single national system to decide when you should stop working, you begin to understand your real burn rate, future expenses, and different income sources. Retirement then shifts from a fixed age in the distant future to something much more attainable, something you can approach gradually rather than wait for passively. And finally, there's education lock-in, not for ourselves, but for the next generation. Most of us watching these are already out of the education system, but we still influence how our children think about work, money, and success. Loosening this lock means helping them see education as exploration rather than ranking, and giving them more options than we had, not fewer. In an AI-driven world, I believe the systems built over the past few decades are about to shift, and they are likely to do so rapidly. These systems will keep adjusting to fit a new economy, and that creates a rare window to loosen long-standing lock-ins. Anyway, this video also marks a slight pivot for this SG Dad channel. Going forward, I want to share more content like this, more educational, more perspective-driven, focusing on financial independence, money, and life design. If you are still interested in our daily life, family moments, and lifestyle content in Japan, that will continue on Instagram at sgmomjp. I will still talk about Japan from time to time in this channel, especially when it connects to these themes. But this channel will be less about daily lifestyle and more about helping you think more clearly. My goal is for this channel to be more about you than about me. If this direction resonates with you, feel free to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.